was only 3 days postpartum. My body was completely exhausted, still aching and healing, but as I held my beautiful newborn daughter in my arms, none of that mattered. She was my perfect little miracle. That's exactly how I felt when I walked through the front doors of my family home, desperately looking for a safe place to rest. But my mother and older sister just stared at my baby with a cold, calculated look I will never forget. Before I could even set my bags down, my own mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are young. You can always have another one, but this is your sister's only chance. Give the baby to her." I stood there, clutching my newborn to my chest, completely paralyzed. When I refused, sobbing and begging her to understand, my mother's face turned to stone. That very same night, in the freezing cold, she forced me and my 3-day-old baby out of the house. I spent my first night as a mother huddled in the back of my car, wrapping my coat around my daughter so she wouldn't freeze, believing my family had just snapped out of grief over my sister's infertility. What I didn't know as I sat shivering in the dark was that my mother and sister had been hiding a terrifying secret from me for months. Something that would prove that night wasn't an accident at all, but part of a chilling plan they had been working on since the very day I announced my pregnancy. If you enjoy stories about a mother's fierce protective love, heartbreaking family betrayals, and the shocking truth finally coming to light, please stay with me until the very end. And if this story touches your heart, I'd be so grateful if you took a moment to subscribe to this small channel of ours. It genuinely means the world to us. To understand how my own mother could do something so unthinkable to her own flesh and blood, you have to understand the house I grew up in. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. We lived in a nice neighborhood, went to church on Sundays, and my mother always made sure the front porch was decorated for every single holiday. But inside those walls, there was a very clear, unspoken rule. My older sister, Clara, was the absolute center of the universe, and I was just simply there. Clara was 4 years older than me, and in my mother's eyes, she was flawless. She was the beautiful, outgoing girl who did everything right, and my mother practically worshipped the ground she walked on. If Clara wanted something, my mother moved mountains to get it for her. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in my house was to make myself small, to stay out of the way, and to never ask for too much attention. When Clara grew up and married a very successful, wealthy man, my mother spared no expense. It was the wedding of the century, and my mother paraded Clara around like a trophy. But a few years into her perfect marriage, the fairy tale suddenly cracked. Clara couldn't get pregnant. They tried everything: specialists, expensive treatments, special diets. But month after month, year after year, it always ended in heartbreak. If you are a mother, or if you have ever watched someone you love struggle to become one, you know exactly how devastating that kind of pain is. It completely consumes a person. I felt so incredibly deeply for my sister. I truly did. But my mother didn't just sympathize with Clara. She made Clara's infertility the absolute center of our entire family's existence. Every holiday, every dinner conversation, every phone call was completely overshadowed by Clara's grief. We all had to walk on eggshells. And slowly, my mother began treating me as if my very existence and my own happiness was somehow an insult to my sister's pain. I eventually moved out, got a modest job, and married a wonderfully kind, gentle man named Thomas. We didn't have a lot of money, and we certainly didn't have a grand, expensive wedding like Clara's, but we had a very peaceful, loving home. A few years after we got married, I noticed I was a few days late. I bought a test from the local pharmacy, and when I saw those 2 pink lines appear, I fell to my knees on the bathroom floor and cried tears of pure joy. Thomas and I were absolutely ecstatic. We spent our evenings looking at paint colors for the spare bedroom and talking about what our baby's laugh would sound like. But underneath all that incredible joy I felt a heavy, sinking dread about telling my family. I knew it was going to be hard for Clara to hear. I didn't want to cause her any pain, so I decided to wait until I was safely out of my first trimester before I went over to my mother's house to tell them privately. I will never forget the moment I broke the news. We were all sitting in my mother's living room. I nervously took a deep breath, smiled, and told them that Thomas and I were expecting a baby. I expected a little bit of shock, maybe some bittersweet tears, but the reaction I got was entirely unnatural. The room went dead silent. Clara didn't say a single word. Her face just crumpled. She burst into tears, and she ran up the stairs, slamming her childhood bedroom door behind her. My mother didn't get up to hug me. She didn't congratulate me or ask how I was feeling. She just sat in her armchair, staring at my stomach with this blank, completely cold expression. Then she looked up at my face and sighed heavily, as if I had just told her someone died. "You have always had everything come so easy to you," my mother whispered, her voice dripping with pure resentment. "It just isn't fair. Clara deserves this so much more than you do." I drove home that day crying, feeling like a terrible person simply for being blessed with a child. Throughout the rest of my pregnancy, things only got stranger. My mother would call me occasionally, but she never asked how I was doing. She never asked if I had morning sickness or if my feet were swelling. She only ever asked about the baby. Whenever I visited, she would stare at my growing belly with an intensity that honestly made my skin crawl. Sometimes, she would reach out and touch my stomach, completely ignoring my face, and say the most unsettling things. She would murmur, "This baby is going to finally heal our family." Or she would look at my sister and say, "Clara is going to have so much fun decorating the nursery." At the time, I was naive. I desperately convinced myself that my mother was just trying to include my grieving sister in the process, to help her heal by being a proud aunt. I thought they were just trying to find a silver lining in their own sadness, but looking back now, the signs were all right there in front of me. The strange, probing questions about my medical history, my mother insisting on knowing exactly which hospital I was delivering at, the way Clara would look at my stomach with a quiet, desperate kind of hunger. I thought I was bringing a beautiful new life into a family that just needed a little bit of hope. I had absolutely no idea that to my mother and my sister, I wasn't a mother at all. To them, I was nothing more than a vessel, carrying a child that they had already decided belonged to them. The last few months of my pregnancy were physically exhausting, but mentally, I was living in a state of pure, quiet bliss. I pushed my mother's strange comments to the back of my mind, focusing entirely on the tiny life growing inside of me. When the day finally came to deliver my baby, it was a long, grueling labor. I was in agonizing pain for over 20 hours, holding my husband Thomas's hand so tightly I thought I might break his fingers. But the moment the doctors finally placed my beautiful, crying baby girl onto my chest, the entire world simply faded away. Every ounce of exhaustion, every ounce of pain completely vanished. I looked down at her tiny, perfect face, her little fingers wrapping around my thumb, and I knew right then and there that I would cross oceans and walk through fire to protect her. She was a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby girl. I was exhausted, recovering from a severe tear, but I was so incredibly happy. But that beautiful bubble of joy was shattered the moment my mother and my sister Clara walked into my hospital room the next morning. If you have ever given birth, you know that those first few days in the hospital are deeply intimate and vulnerable. When family comes to visit, they usually bring flowers, ask how the mother is feeling, and softly coo over the newborn. But my mother and sister didn't bring flowers for me. They didn't even ask how my labor was, or if I was in pain. They walked straight past my hospital bed as if I were completely invisible, and went directly to the clear plastic bassinet where my daughter was sleeping. Clara reached in and picked up my baby without even asking for my permission. She held her tight to her chest, rocking her, and closed her eyes. My mother stood next to her, gently stroking the baby's head. "She is so perfect," my mother whispered to Clara, completely ignoring me. "She looks exactly like you did when you were a baby, Clara. She is going to be so beautiful." I sat there in my hospital bed, my body aching and bleeding, watching the two of them huddle over my child. A primal, maternal alarm bell started ringing loudly in the back of my mind. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy and unnatural, but I was so tired, heavily medicated, and desperate for my family's love that I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I told myself they were just excited. 3 days later, I was finally discharged from the hospital. Thomas had to go straight back to work because we couldn't afford for him to take unpaid time off, so my mother offered to let me stay at my childhood home for a few days to rest and recover. It sounded like a blessing. I thought it meant she finally wanted to care for me, to bring me warm meals and help me heal, the way a mother is supposed to care for her daughter after childbirth. Thomas kissed my forehead, dropped me and the baby off at my mother's house with my bags, and promised to come back as soon as his shift was over. The moment Thomas's car pulled out of the driveway, the atmosphere in the house instantly shifted. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I was barely able to stand on my own 2 feet. Every step sent a sharp pain through my healing body. I walked into the living room, holding my sleeping baby tight against my chest, just looking for a soft place to sit down. My mother and Clara were already sitting on the sofa, waiting for me. They weren't smiling. They just stared at me. And more specifically, they stared at the baby in my arms, with a cold, calculated intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mother stood up, walked past me, and I heard the heavy deadbolt of the front door click shut. She locked it. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" "I just need to lie down for a little bit." My mother slowly turned around. She didn't look at my face. She kept her eyes completely fixed on my daughter. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth or maternal affection. I slowly lowered myself into an armchair, clutching my baby closer. Clara was staring at me, with her hands tightly folded in her lap, her eyes dark and unreadable. "We need to talk about the reality of this situation," my mother said, stepping closer to me. "You and Thomas barely have any money. You live in a tiny, cramped house. You have always struggled to keep up. But Clara has a massive, beautiful home. Clara has the financial security to give this child the life she actually deserves." I felt the blood drain completely from my face. My heart started pounding so hard against my ribs that I thought it might burst. "What are you talking about?" I gasped, instinctively wrapping both of my arms protectively around my baby. My mother looked me dead in the eye, her expression as hard as a stone. "You are young," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "You can always just have another one later. You have plenty of time. But this is your sister's only chance to be a mother. Hand the baby over to her. We will raise her here. You can visit on holidays." The room started spinning. I couldn't breathe. My own mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect me, was standing in front of me, demanding that I hand over my 3-day-old newborn child like she was a borrowed piece of jewelry. "No!" I screamed, the sound tearing out of my dry throat. "Are you insane? She is my daughter. She is my baby. I am not giving my child to Clara." Clara finally stood up, tears of anger springing to her eyes. "You are so incredibly selfish," Clara yelled at me. "You know how much I have suffered. You know I can't have a baby. You have always been jealous of me, and now you are just keeping her to punish me. She is not a toy, Clara. She is a human being, and she is mine." I sobbed, struggling to stand up on my weak, trembling legs. I begged my mother to listen to reason, crying so hard I could barely see. I pleaded with her. reminding her that I had just given birth, that my body was broken, and that I just wanted to go home. But my mother didn't see a grieving, terrified daughter. She only saw an obstacle standing in the way of what her golden child wanted. If you are going to be this selfish, if you are going to deny your own sister the one thing that would save her life, then you are no daughter of mine, my mother hissed, her face contorted with a vicious rage. She grabbed my arm with a terrifying force, her fingernails digging into my skin. Get out! Get out of my house right now. I couldn't even grab my bags. I couldn't grab the extra diapers or the postpartum supplies I desperately needed. My mother physically shoved me toward the front door. I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell, using my own body as a shield to protect my baby. She pulled the door open, pushed me out onto the freezing concrete porch, and slammed the heavy oak door right in my face. The lock clicked again. It was the dead of winter. The wind was howling, slicing through my thin maternity shirt like ice. I had no coat. I had nowhere to go. I managed to hobble to my old car parked on the street, my entire body shaking uncontrollably from the cold and the physical trauma of childbirth. I unlocked the car, climbed into the back seat, and wrapped my own thin jacket entirely around my tiny, fragile daughter to keep her warm. I sat there in the dark, freezing cold, crying so hard that I eventually threw up. I was bleeding, in agonizing pain, and completely shattered. The people who were supposed to love me had just thrown me out into the street like garbage, simply because I wouldn't let them steal my child. I sat in that car for 3 hours waiting for Thomas to get off work and come find me, believing with all my heart that my family had just suffered a temporary, insane break from reality out of grief. But what I didn't know as I sat shivering in that freezing car was that this horrifying night was not a sudden act of anger. It was just the beginning of a deeply calculated, sickening nightmare. The days that followed that horrific night felt like trying to swim through quicksand. Thomas was absolutely furious when he found me shivering in the back of the car. He drove us straight home, locked our doors, and immediately changed his work schedule so he wouldn't have to leave me alone. But the damage to my soul had already been done. If you have ever been a new mother, you know how incredibly vulnerable you are during those first few weeks. Your hormones are crashing, your body is in severe pain, and you are trying to learn how to keep this tiny, fragile human being alive. Now, imagine trying to do all of that while carrying the agonizing realization that your own mother and sister had just tried to strip your baby from your arms and throw you out into the freezing cold. My home, which was supposed to be a warm, joyful sanctuary for my new baby, turned into a quiet little fortress of survival. I jumped at every single noise outside. I kept the curtains tightly drawn. Every time a car drove slowly past our house, my heart would pound so violently in my chest, I thought I might faint. I was terrified that my mother would show up and try to take my baby by force. But deep down, underneath all that terror, there was a profound, suffocating grief. I had no mother to call when the baby wouldn't stop crying at 3 a.m. I had no sister to come over and hold her so I could take a warm shower. I was entirely alone, navigating the terrifying waters of postpartum recovery without a compass. There were nights when I would sit in the dimly lit nursery, rocking my beautiful daughter in my arms, and the tears would just fall silently, soaking the front of my nightgown. The pain of my family's rejection was a physical ache right in the center of my chest. But then, I would look down at the tiny, breathing miracle in my arms. Looking into my daughter's innocent eyes, I made a silent, ironclad vow. I promised I would never, ever let her feel the cold sting of a mother's rejection. I would break the cycle. I would be the mother to my daughter that my own mother had never been to me. Step by step, day by day, I found my footing. I poured every ounce of love I had left in my bruised heart into my little girl. And slowly, the heavy, dark clouds in our home began to lift. If my journey is touching your heart today, or if it reminds you of the quiet, fierce strength we women carry, I would be so honored if you gently tapped that subscribe button and joined our little community. It truly helps me continue sharing these deeply emotional stories with you. 6 months passed. The harsh, bitter winter finally melted away, making room for a bright and hopeful spring. My beautiful baby girl was growing wonderfully. She was now a smiling, babbling infant, with chubby cheeks and bright, curious eyes. The deep, agonizing wounds of my grief had slowly turned into a dull, manageable ache. I had completely cut ties with my mother and sister. I blocked their phone numbers, blocked them on social media, and poured my entire focus into my husband and my daughter. I truly believed that my past was entirely behind me, locked away in a painful chapter I would never have to open again. I thought they had finally given up. But one quiet Tuesday afternoon, while the baby was taking her nap, the silence of our home was shattered by a loud, aggressive knock at the front door. Thomas was at work. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door, expecting a package delivery. I didn't open the door right away. I just peeked through the small glass window. My blood instantly ran cold. Standing on my front porch, wearing a sharp gray suit and holding a thick leather briefcase, was a man I had never seen before. Behind him, parked at the edge of my driveway, was my mother's car. I could see the silhouette of my mother and Clara sitting in the front seats, watching my house. My hands started shaking so violently I could barely keep them steady. I slowly unlocked the door and opened it, just a crack, keeping my foot wedged behind it so the man couldn't push his way inside. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound strong. The man offered a tight, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you Sarah?" he asked. When I nodded, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out to me. "I am an attorney representing your mother and your sister, Clara. You have been officially served." My stomach dropped to the floor. I took the heavy envelope with trembling fingers, staring at the man in complete disbelief. "Served? Served for what?" I managed to whisper. The lawyer adjusted his tie, his expression completely devoid of any emotion. "Your family is filing for emergency custody of your daughter. They have filed a petition claiming that you and your husband are financially unstable, mentally unfit, and incapable of providing a safe environment for the child. They are seeking full, permanent adoption." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I slammed the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and slid down the wall until I hit the floor. I ripped open the manila envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. My eyes scanned the pages, and what I saw made me physically sick to my stomach. This wasn't a sudden, desperate petition they had thrown together in the last few weeks. The dates on the initial legal drafts, the background checks, the financial inquiries into my husband's bank accounts, they were dated months ago. They had started drawing up these adoption papers when I was only 3 months pregnant. While I was happily painting the nursery, while I was showing them ultrasound pictures and thinking I was finally bringing joy into our family, my mother and my sister were sitting in a lawyer's office, meticulously plotting how to declare me an unfit mother so they could legally steal my child the moment she was born. That horrific night in the cold wasn't a sudden act of grief. It was just the first step in a deeply calculated, sickening plan to break me down and take my baby away forever. The sheer panic that washed over me in that moment is something I cannot even put into words. If you are a mother or a grandmother, you know that there is no fear quite like the fear of someone trying to take your child away from you. I sat on the floor of my hallway, clutching those horrifying legal papers to my chest, completely unable to catch my breath. I felt like I was drowning. I immediately called Thomas at work, sobbing so hysterically that he couldn't even understand what I was saying. He rushed home, burst through the front door, and when he read the papers, his face turned completely white. We were just a normal, hard-working couple. We didn't have the kind of massive wealth or resources my family had. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she could afford the most ruthless, expensive lawyers in the state, and she was banking on the fact that we would simply run out of money and be forced to surrender. But what my mother severely underestimated was the absolute, fierce, unbreakable strength of a mother's love. Thomas and I didn't surrender. We fought. We took out a second mortgage on our small house. We sold our second car, and we drained every single penny of our meager savings to hire the best family defense attorney we could find. Her name was Mrs. Higgins, a sharp, no-nonsense older woman who took one look at my family's petition and immediately saw right through their lies. The next few months were a living nightmare. My family dragged us through agonizing psychological evaluations, invasive home inspections, and endless court depositions. My mother stood in front of judges and social workers, crying fake crocodile tears, painting me as a young, unstable, completely hysterical woman who couldn't even afford to buy formula, while painting Clara as the wealthy, stable, perfect savior who could give my daughter the world. It was psychological torture. I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly terrified that social services would just show up and take my baby away. But then, the universe finally decided that we had suffered enough. The massive, shocking twist in this nightmare didn't come from a dramatic courtroom speech. It came from a very quiet, completely unexpected phone call on a Tuesday morning. I was in my kitchen washing bottles when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. When I answered, a hesitant, nervous voice spoke on the other end. "Sarah, this is Dr. Evans' receptionist. I really shouldn't be calling you, and I could lose my job for this, but my conscience just won't let me sleep at night anymore." My heart completely stopped. Dr. Evans was Clara's longtime fertility specialist, the doctor my mother constantly talked about for years. I asked the woman what she meant. What she told me next completely blew the roof off of my mother's entire, carefully constructed lie. "Sarah," the receptionist whispered, her voice trembling, "I saw the news in the local paper about the custody battle. I saw what your sister is claiming in court, but it's a lie. Clara's infertility, it's not permanent. It never was." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I begged her to explain. She told me that 3 years ago, Dr. Evans had diagnosed Clara with a very specific, totally treatable condition. Clara could absolutely have her own children, but the treatment required a minor surgery and several months of a very strict, incredibly uncomfortable medical regimen. But Clara didn't want to go through the physical pain of the surgery. She didn't want to deal with the weight gain, the hormones, or the physical toll that pregnancy would take on her perfect body. Clara wasn't permanently infertile. She was simply unwilling to ruin her figure. My mother had known this the entire time. They had lied to our extended family, lied to Clara's husband, and lied to the entire world about Clara being a tragic victim of infertility, all to garner sympathy and attention. And when I accidentally got pregnant, Clara saw an easy, pain-free way out. Why ruin her own perfect body when she could just steal the baby from her quiet, obedient, easily manipulated younger sister? Armed with this explosive truth, my attorney, Mrs. Higgins, moved with the speed of lightning. She immediately subpoenaed Clara's medical records from Dr. Evans' gay clinic under the legal grounds of investigating Clara's physical fitness to adopt. My mother's high-priced lawyers fought like wild dogs to keep those records sealed, which only made the judge more suspicious. When the judge finally ordered the records to be released, the entire courtroom was completely silenced. The final custody hearing was something out of a movie. I sat nervously next to Thomas, holding his hand, while my mother and Clara sat across the aisle, looking incredibly smug and confident in their expensive designer suits. But that confidence completely shattered the moment Mrs. Higgins stood up and presented Clara's medical records to the judge. Mrs. Higgins didn't hold back. She methodically, ruthlessly dismantled their entire web of lies. She proved that Clara had refused a highly successful, minor procedure to conceive her own child simply out of vanity. She presented emails between my mother and Clara, dated months before my baby was even born, discussing how they would slowly drain my bank accounts with legal fees until I was forced to give up. Mrs. Higgins looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, this is not a petition to rescue a child from an unfit mother. This is a wealthy, entitled family attempting to legally kidnap a child because the sister was too vain to endure a pregnancy herself." The look on my mother's face was one of absolute, unadulterated horror. She realized, in that exact moment, that the quiet, obedient daughter she had spent my entire life walking all over had finally stood up and completely destroyed her. The judge was absolutely furious. I will never forget the look of utter disgust on his face as he slammed his gavel down. He not only threw out their custody petition immediately, but he also issued a permanent, ironclad restraining order against my mother and my sister, legally barring them from ever coming within 500 feet of my daughter, my husband, or me. He made it very clear that if they ever tried to file another frivolous lawsuit or harass my family again, he would see to it that they faced criminal charges for fraud and harassment. I sat in that quiet courtroom, tears pouring down my face, completely overwhelmed by a massive, crashing wave of relief. The heavy, terrifying storm that had been hanging over my home for almost a year was finally, officially, over. But the consequences of my mother's deceit didn't just end in that courtroom. The truth, especially a truth that ugly, has a way of violently ripping through a family. Clara's husband, who had been completely kept in the dark about her medical records, was sitting in the back of the courtroom during the hearing. He had genuinely believed his wife was tragically infertile. He had spent years crying with her, paying for expensive treatments, and grieving the children they couldn't have. When he realized that Clara had lied to him for years, that she had refused treatment simply because she didn't want to ruin her body, and then tried to steal my baby to cover it up, he was completely devastated. He filed for divorce less than a week later, leaving Clara entirely alone and stripped of the wealthy, high society life she valued above everything else. As the news of the courtroom drama slowly leaked out to our extended family and friends, the pristine, perfect image my mother had spent her entire life building completely crumbled to ashes. People who had sympathized with Clara for years were absolutely horrified. Aunt Martha, my mother's own sister, called me crying, apologizing profusely for ever doubting me. My mother and Clara were completely ostracized from their social circles, left alone in their big, quiet houses, with absolutely no one left to manipulate. Poetic justice doesn't always come with a loud announcement. Sometimes, it just looks like the people who tried to destroy you suddenly realizing that they have completely destroyed themselves. As for me, I chose to walk away from the ashes of my past and never look back. Thomas and I slowly rebuilt our savings. We planted a beautiful flower garden in the backyard, painted the front door a cheerful yellow, and filled our tiny, modest house with an overwhelming amount of love and laughter. My beautiful baby girl is now a vibrant, joyful little toddler who runs around the house with chubby legs, completely unaware of the massive battle we fought to keep her safe. She has never known the coldness of my mother's rejection, and she never will. I broke the cycle. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I go into her room and just watch her sleep. I think about that freezing night in the back of my car, when I felt so incredibly broken and helpless. And I realize now that I wasn't broken at all. I was just learning how to be strong. I learned that you don't need to come from a perfect, wealthy family to be a good mother. You just need to have a heart brave enough to protect your peace and fierce enough to stand up to anyone who tries to take it away. My dear friends, thank you so much for sitting with me today and letting me share my journey with you. Life can throw us into some terrifying storms, and sometimes the deepest betrayals come from the people who are supposed to protect us the most. But my story is a reminder that as women, as mothers, and as grandmothers, we carry a fierce, quiet strength inside of us that can weather absolutely anything. If you found a piece of yourself in this story today, or if it brought hope to your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a little comment below sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the absolute world to me, and it allows me to keep sharing these beautiful stories with you. Until next time, take care of yourselves, hold your loved ones a little closer, and remember that you are incredibly strong. God bless, and I will see you in the next story.